Okay. Good day, everyone. Did you know that according to the World Health Organization, globally, there's an estimated 12 billion working days that are lost every year due to depression and anxiety to the tune of $1 trillion per year in lost productivity. Now, performance reviews and mental health aren't typically part of the same discussion, but maybe they should be. So, good day, everyone. I'm Christina Green, your generational translator in the workplace. And today we're talking about building resilient teams by humanizing feedback. Okay, so let's get to it. So, the problem today with performance reviews is that they traditionally focus on performance policing rather than support, or that's the feeling or the air around them, right? They also too are maybe they ignore the human behind the metrics. These are clear signs when we get it wrong, right? But when we lean in to actually know a bit more about our teams and the humans that are contributing to the massive work that is underway, that is when we get it right. Right. So when we get it wrong, this leads to burnout, anxiety, disengagement. And eventually people are walking out the door, right? High attrition rates. People they don't leave over bad feedback. They leave due to foolish feedback, right? That is maybe unsubstantiated, and it's reducing the humans to just the metrics. Now, 72% of employees say that they don't find help feedback to be helpful, right? Now, that's not a them problem, that's actually a system problem. It means that we are not using this as an opportunity to communicate where there are gaps and how we might be able to partner moving forward. Now, just a bit more about me and who I am and why do I care about this so much? Well, I've spent over 20 years in healthcare, managing teams, delivering reviews, and sitting in those review meetings until I just hit a wall. I burnt out myself, right? And as a Gen X leader, I've internalized a lot of this culture myself. I have said these phrases and I have heard these excuses, right? That they're just too soft, right? Or I had to tough it out, so why shouldn't they? Or why do I even give feedback? There's no one listening anyway. Well, when we treat people or we treat reviews like it's a punishment, or we skip this human part altogether, we will lose people. Either they'll stay and be disengaged, or they literally will walk out the door. And not because they can't handle the expectations, but because we didn't handle them correctly. So let's stop measuring people by what they produce, right? By just the results, and start building teams that are resilient because they feel seen, heard, and valued. All right, so now let's talk a bit about how performance management can unintentionally lead to harming our teams, right, on a mental level. Now, if we are only focusing on the what was done, right, on just the what was done, the outcome, instead of how the people were impacted, right? What was the effort that went into the effort that went into the results? If we focus on the how and the how specifically around the people, that is when we start to understand the story more clearly, the performance more clearly. When we also too misplace the weight of decision making. I've seen this in my career where leaders will delegate the responsibility or really the accountability to making decisions to the wrong level, right? You put an unnecessary weight or burden on other members of your team who report into you by giving them the decision, the full weight of the decision, as opposed to taking the accountability yourself. That can be a heavy weight or heavy burden for your teams that are just unfair. Providing vague feedback without any specifics. This can be an emotional whiplash, right? Because we're using language, that they're just, you're just not, you didn't meet expectations, or you're not showing up authentically, or you're not showing up as your full self. What exactly does that even mean, right? And when we use the vague language like this in our reviews, especially in our reviews, because it's usually tied to our performance is usually tied to some type of dollar amount, right? A merit increase, a performance-based bonus. These things are what add a lot of additional emotions to this season that are just unnecessary. So don't use vague language. And I'm going to go through some details on how it is that we might be able to massage or provide some more specific language that can actually help these situations better, right? So here are some examples of some stress-inducing language that and how your teams might receive this, especially across the generations. So here's one example. You're not meeting expectations. Well, okay, so not only is this vague, but this also too triggers some anxiety, perhaps maybe even shame, especially for millennials and Gen Z who feel that they have entered into the workplace and they're trying to prove themselves, especially millennials where they still have bought into the idea of climbing this ladder, right? The corporate ladder. And so they tend to internalize what this failure means instead of really recognizing how this is an opportunity to ask more questions and get more clarity and guidance on how they could achieve or meet the expectations, right? They prioritize, millennials and Gen Z tend to, they're not being overly sensitive, right? They tend to prioritize doing the work that is aligned with with an impactful, they prioritize doing work that is aligned and impactful. And failure in this space can actually feel really crucial. It can feel like it is breaking their career journey in a very critical way, right? This phrase, not meeting expectation, also too lacks clarity. Gen X and Boomers, they feel confused or blindsided, right? Especially if there's not been any prior feedback that has been provided to help them with course correction. So and leave them wondering what is actually the expectation, right? While we'll say that Boomers may be more resilient in this space, especially Gen X, the question is you still have to lead with some type of guidance around what was the expectation and where exactly was the gap. So here's a better way to say, instead of not meeting expectations, approach it through this lens, right? Let's walk through where the gaps are and create a plan together to help you grow in this area. So, and even saying this better, be specific about what the expectations were and where the gaps were. Okay. Now, I cannot stress this enough. If you've not had this conversation prior to now, if you've not discussed what expectations were and outlined that at the onset of establishing an agreement for them to do this work, this is not going to be an easy conversation to have because you're leading with new information and actually delivering it with a hammer, if you will, right? Okay, but that's a conversation I think we've had before, but we can go into that separately. Here's another example, right? If you're saying there are areas of concern, oh boy, this is as vague as they come, and it's kind of like a dagger straight to the heart, right? This can be vague and ominous. It can create spiraling thoughts, especially for Gen Z who prefer transparency. What the heck does this even mean, right? So why, lead with the specifics, help them understand what is the area of concern, what is concerning about their performance. Skip this sentence altogether. Well, there are areas of concern that is just weighted in vagueness, and it's never going to get you what you're looking for. It leads the conversation off incorrectly. Now, Boomers and Gen X may interpret this as a threat to their job security. Now, remember, including millennials in this space, they have experienced a number of layoffs and they have started to break this idea of what it means to be loyal to any particular corporation or organization. And so they may feel that you are literally challenging them, and perhaps maybe they need to start to look for another position, because experience tells them that maybe this will lead to a performance improvement plan or maybe even termination, right? So this language, be very careful about how you use it. I would say skip it altogether. Here's what to use instead. Instead of areas of concern, use this instead. Here are a few specific things that I've noticed that we can improve together, right? And go through what that looks like. And then let's talk through what support you might need to be successful moving forward. This shows collaboration. One, it provides some specifics around what exactly was missed, maybe where the gap is, and starts to build a bridge of support to how it is that they can be successful moving forward. Lots more examples, but if you have more questions about what language to use instead, then just send me a message. I'm happy to support this, or drop it in the chat, and I'm happy to support that as well. All right. So the connection is, so high pressure reviews just equal chronic stress. It makes people feel uneasy at this time, right? So we know, you've heard me talk about this before. Generationally, how do they feel supported? Well, boomers take pride in their work. They take pride in doing a good job, and also to having a good review, right? They are less likely to name the stress, and so they will internalize it. They will essentially continue to just push through, because that is the way that they understand how to approach this, right? Gen X will internalize this pressure, and they will see the struggle as a norm, because they are the resilient generation, right? In many ways, we've had to do with less and create miracle and perform miracles around this, right? So they're used to moving in this vague space, but it doesn't mean that they do not deserve to have guidance. You've got to be specific with Gen X, because they want to know what is the gap, and specifically, what does that success even look like? Millennials will lead with high anxiety. Remember, they are trying to get to a title. They have a career objective. They have obtained multiple high education degrees, and they are trying to leverage them as a way of climbing that corporate ladder that has been shifting with them their entire careers. So they want clarity, but they want your support along this process. Now, Gen Z, they expect transparency. They expect their mental health to be a priority and to be part of that conversation. They do not break the two when it comes to how it is that they approach their work. Who they are as an individual is actually influencing and bringing their best selves into this space. So you cannot break it in this conversation. Not saying to become their therapist, but I'm saying is to acknowledge the fact that there are humans who are doing this great work, and the human needs to be taken care of along this process as well. All right. Now, how you know your feedback is missing the mark, right? So if you're giving this feedback and you're experiencing any of these things, this is an example that you are completely missing your target, right? Perhaps maybe your team is ghosting you after your reviews, meaning they are not responding to emails as they normally would in the same timeline, right? Maybe they're delayed in their turnaround times on initiatives where they would normally jump right in and perhaps maybe exceed expectations on turnaround times. Maybe now they're a bit more stalled. This means that there's something that's getting in the way, right, of them feeling valued in this space. Maybe they are feeling you're noticing some sudden disengagement or defensiveness. So perhaps maybe in interactions, you'll notice maybe short messages. If messaging is your thing within your team or meetings, instead of providing a more in-depth explanation, they are more short in their answer, in their responses, right? Maybe they are, especially in the performance reviews, if you notice that they have over prepared, they have brought, even electronically demonstrated every receipt that they can imagine that will support their performance over the last performance year, right? They have rehearsed their pitches. They are leading with all of their accomplishments, and they're doing so with such high energy. This is telling you that they feel that they have to prove themselves or remind you of their contributions that they've had for this performance year. These are fear-based responses. And all of this is telling you that perhaps maybe they feel that they feel threatened and or like they can't trust you in this space or during this period. Maybe they are quiet during meetings. Their body language is closed instead of open. And maybe you're noticing resignations. All of these things can tell you that perhaps maybe your feedback did not land, right? Remember, people are not leaving because they are receiving bad feedback. It's because that there is no care for the human that is moving through this experience. So how do we shift that? We talk through the generations, right? So tactically, boomers They want deliver it was based on respect and be direct. Gen X, show the feedback and how that ties to the outcomes, right? Even if you've outlined what success looks like, what their result was, and how there might have been a gap between that and a full expectation, or what success truly is, tie that to what that outcome or that expected outcome was. That is how you'll help them to understand that, making those connections, right? Millennials need to approach this from a coaching perspective, right? How can you help them support their growth moving forward? And Gen Z, provide real time, right? If this is a performance review cycle that you are only speaking with them on an annual basis, you're missing the mark across all generations. Annual performance reviews should not be the only time that you're talking with your team. The frequency should be determined based on how it is that you are engaging with your teams, right? So as you always hear me say, speak to your teams to understand exactly what they need to feel supported and to be successful in their roles. Now let's get into how to actually humanize this feedback without lowering your expectations, because that's not the expectation here. It's not to coddle your team or to bend to every whim. It's to be aware and intentional with how it is that you are not only approaching your performance review, but also to how you're being fair in checking in with your teams along the way. All right, now what it actually looks like to lead with this humanity, right? You ditch the one size fits all model, right? You've heard me talk about this before. You need to know your audience. Who is your team? And this isn't, while I give you a guideline around each generation, there's going to be differences. There's going to be personality differences across each generation that is not going to apply to everyone, right? So make sure you know your audience. What's the frequency they want to receive feedback? How do they like to receive feedback? And using some of that language to make sure that you're not being you're not approaching them in a way that is going to put them on the defensive. And we'll go into some of that in just a minute. Clarify your intent, right? Be specific and provide the why behind your feedback. Co-create the next steps. Let them take the lead with coming, take them along the journey. Make sure that they understand what it looks like, right, to be successful, and co-create what these next steps can look like. Troubleshooting what type of support that they need, how it is that you can show up for them so they can be successful. And then be intentional, right? So adjust your check-ins, your reviews to the frequency that aligns with your teams, right? And make this easy. Have your information, have the performance tracking, let it be compounding, right? So be constantly collecting. If you are an Excel nerd like me, right, put this all in a place that is organized, so that way review season does not become a time where your stress is high, because your team is already coming into this space at a time where they are feeling very much on edge. So protect your energy by being proactive and intentional throughout the performance year. Okay, now second is to move from what's wrong, right? Here's what you did wrong and shaking the finger at them, to what's next, right? So opening up the conversation to where, here's where we've landed, but how can we continue to grow together, right? So by doing this, when you lead with what's wrong, you put people on the defensive, right? It frames the conversation around judgment and makes employees feel like they're on trial, that they have to defend themselves. They have to bring all of the evidence to prove you wrong, right? When you shift to what's next, you promote psychological safety, right? So your employees start to feel invited into this process rather than sitting on the outskirts and feeling judged and or punished, right? It says that I see you, I believe in your growth, and I want to support your success. It also too reinforces the accountability, not perfection. No one is perfect moving through, and not even you, right? So we're not perfect as we move through this space. You're going to sit with before your leader to do the same thing, right? So how do you approach this to support your team? Because your team's success is your success, right? Humanizing does not mean ignoring the gaps, the problems, the issues, the misses. It means that we address them with clarity, right, and compassion. So what's next? It doesn't erase the expectations. It in fact just reframes them and makes them achievable milestones, right? Next, it also too empowers problem solving and ownership. This is so when employees can participate in identifying what these next steps look like, they will build the muscle of resilience and retention, those decision-making processes where they do not have to rely on you for everything. This also too supports them growing within their role, within their space, within the team, within the organization. This is how you are starting to build the long-term muscles for them to be able to step into greater responsibility and perhaps leadership positions, right? Gen Z is an example. They thrive on these types of environments where they're asked to contribute solutions and not just receive directives, right? So if this is top-down approach where you're just telling your team everything that they need to do, execute, get this done and being specific about it, this space is not going to be conducive to Gen Z so much because they're looking to have more collaboration. With the same with millennials. They want a collaborative space where they can grow together. So this and have an input into what the solutions could look like. So when you speak to the what needs to be completed instead of the how can be micromanagement, right? Where you are defining every step. Now, this doesn't apply to everyone because sometimes there are processes, there are procedures, protocols we have to follow every single step. But find some flexibility where you can start to invite a more collaborative space where your team can start to solution together. All right. Now, when we normalize the feedback and we make this a two-way conversation, we invite our employees in, we invite our teammates in to be part of the growth process, right? Part of how do we solution, because when you look at how there might have been a misstep or a missed result, this can give you an opportunity to say, are we approaching this collectively as a team in the right way? Right? So think about it not just at the individual level, but as their leader, is there another approach that we can take towards the work that we do, either annually, how we approach new initiatives, how we problem solve as these things start to arise, right? So use this as an opportunity to be collaborative in this space. Now, when we provide this two-way feedback, right, we build the trust where your voice matters. You're communicating that to your team to say, this isn't just about, I'm not judge, jury, and executioner, that in fact, this is a opportunity for us, collaboratively as a team, right? This also too builds engagement. So makes them part of the process and not just the subject of an evaluation, of the handing down of metrics, of ratings, right? And it fosters this psychological safety. Now, we tend to think that this is, people are being overly sensitive in the space. No, this is actually what everyone needs across every single generation, is to know that they are protected and they are safe in this space to be vulnerable. That means to fail as well as to succeed, right? Or to even provide just at a mid-range performance level, right? Because perfection is not the goal. It's actually, in fact, meeting the expectations, but continuing to grow in that space as well. When we create that psychological safety, it lets people understand that they can be honest without fear of punishment. All right. Now, here's how to co-create this path moving forward, right? So remember, co-creation, this is not permission. It's a partnership. It is not you just handing over the reins and telling them that they can take this and run with it. But it's more so creating a space where you will be a partner with them to help make them successful, to make them, because when they are successful, then their teammates are also successful, right? So instead of you leading with, you need to do X by next week, this is, you try saying something a little differently, right? Here is what I noticed, right? So speaking to the specifics of what happened, the result. Now, how do you think we can course correct, right? So creating that language or that space, holding space for them to be able to troubleshoot around how do we build the bridge towards getting to the expectation, right? Now, putting this into action, you can schedule check-ins with your team. Once again, ask them what type of frequency, and I set a standard of minimum, it may not be realistic to check in with your team on a weekly basis, or perhaps even, bi-weekly. Create a cadence that they can in the structure that will support your overall success. And don't make this about having another meeting. I will tell you, while, I'm a Gen X leader, and I tend to lean on meetings, but I recognize that not everybody likes that, right? So while Gen X and boomers, we may be very conditioned to, accomplish much in a meeting, it may not be amenable to doing that for one, for everyone, or two, across other generations, right? Millennials and Gen Z, especially Gen Z, do not see the value in bringing everybody together to meet all the time, or even to meet one-on-one. Sometimes a quick check-in that's maybe 15 minutes. Think of it like if you're in project management, it's just a scrum meeting. Like, we're quickly going to talk logistics and tactics, right? You can take a similar approach to this. 15-minute check-in could just be, hey, I just want to check in with you to see how things are going. This does not have to be so overly structured where people have to spend a lot of time preparing materials for you to provide an update, but this is really trying to keep a pulse on the work that's being done. So figure out the frequency that makes sense, but make sure you are getting in front of your team for them to communicate maybe what their progress is, challenges that they need some support with, and how it is that you can support them, right? Also, to use emotion neutral language, right? So something, instead of "you were careless with this report" or "you missed the deadline," you want to remove the "you" statements and replace them with the factual obligation, or the factual observations that open the door to collaborative next steps, right? So instead of saying "you did this," saying, approach it from a way that is leading with the facts first, and then building that bridge to how now do we get to the next steps, right? How do we support them? Now, ask versus assume. You do not know the full story. You do not know exactly how it is that they got to where they were, even if they've missed a deadline, they've missed a metric. Understand what kind of feedback is helpful to them. How do they need to, one, not only be approached in that situation, so that help them understand if they are to receive feedback, how do they like it? One, I think no one is going to enjoy being ridiculed, right, publicly in front of their team. But you've heard me talk about this before, where there are different frequencies that each of the generations will respond differently to feedback. So lean into that space, and we'll go into that in just a moment, right? Now, acknowledge their effort and the impact. So what their results look like, what their contribution was, what was the race that they ran? Was it a sprint? Was it a marathon? What did that journey kind of look like? And what was the result? What was the impact that they had from their effort, the role that they played in executing or moving through the work that they were in charge of? What was the impact to what they were doing? Now, I would also to say that this is something you should be doing throughout, one, at the assignment of doing any new task. Help them be connected to the end result that their contribution is going to have. They may own one link in the chain, but help them to understand and make those connections to, you're doing this one thing is ultimately going to allow us to be able to do this, right? To accomplish X, Y, Z. Now, every grain of sand does not recognize how much they contribute to the full beach, right, that exists. So make sure you can connect those dots for your teams. That's how they will be bought into the process. Now, high level. So here's what every generation really kind of needs from the feedback. Boomers prefer direct, respect-based feedback that is rooted in experience, maybe no more than quarterly. More frequently is going to feel like micromanagement. Gen X, they value their autonomy, right? And feedback that is practical, that is tied to milestones or results, right? So their feedback is about quarterly, or maybe as the project milestones may dictate. Millennials, they crave that growth, that kind of coaching perspective. So they like to have that feedback on a more frequent basis. So ongoing, maybe as needed, and as they're progressing through their initiatives. but they need to know that you support them along their journey. Now, Gen Z is going to want clarity and purpose and check-ins that really feel human. Do not use any corporate jargon with them. Do not use a copy and paste template. You're going to turn them off. They're just speak to them as humans, right? They like the frequency at the point of the observation. This doesn't mean interrupt them during the presentation. This means that as a presentation or as the meeting might conclude, circle back with them within that day, right? If not immediately after, help them to understand maybe where there can be some course correction. Unless it makes sense and it's an open conversation where everyone is contributing, then you can provide some guidance there. But they do not like to waste their time, and I don't think anyone does, right? So provide them with that feedback immediately so they can start to make some of those course corrections. Okay. And just one moment. Okay, so that was a lot of information, and I want to share a bit more with you about, or this is how we've been able to approach performance reviews in a way from a human perspective. How do we make sure that we can align the human side with the performance review and the expectations of the organization? Let me take just a quick pause. I see a question. Ah, exactly, Susie. Who wants feedback from a year ago? No one, right? So be timely with how it is that you're delivering that feedback. And that goes across every generation, right? So do not wait for a year to pass or an extended amount of time to let them know how they did or how they performed on any particular initiative or that they were in charge of. Okay, let me shift my screens here. All right. So performance reviews do not have to feel like punishment, although you've heard me say this before, they are inundated with high emotions because the stakes are high in this space, right? When you approach reviews from a human perspective, you get more trust and less stress. People feel welcomed in part of this conversation. They feel that they can be their full selves, not only in their during the performance review season, but also too in their approach to the work that they are doing. You reduce the turnover because people feel valued in this space and they're less likely to leave. And guess what? They're also too more likely to bring their friends. If no one is referring anybody into high stakes or positions or departments where there are great vacancies, if you do not notice that anyone is making recommendations to bring their friends or a family into the organization, that's a sign that maybe they have a distrust either within the organization or perhaps maybe even within your team. Now, teams who want to, you're also to get teams who want to show up and they want to perform. So instead of just doing the bare minimum, that perhaps maybe they will be going above and beyond, right? Or they may be leaning in and providing added layers of their expertise into that space. And that's what you want. That is how we continue to grow as companies. Now, it also too leads to a culture where people feel seen and not just scored, right? This is not a checklist where measuring them based on their performance and how they're able to jump high or to, or to stay silent and to do or be obedient in that space. Retaining your multi-generational team requires an awareness of your generational biases. And believe me that they exist, even if you're not aware of them. And how those biases actually influence how we show up during the performance review season, as well as the performance year. Now, if you're ready to talk about how to turn your generational differences into strengths, maybe start to equip your leaders to start to develop that leadership pipeline and to future-proof your workforce, then let's have a conversation. The QR code on the screen connects you directly to my calendar. Let's chat about what this looks like and how to support your multi-generational team on an ongoing basis. All right, now we're going to be continuing the discussion next week. So every Wednesday, we go live talking about different generational dynamics in the workforce and how it is that we can continue to work together. And guess what? Next week is Global Intergenerational Week. What does this mean? This means that we are celebrating and acknowledging the contribution to a multi-generational workforce and how it is that that's continuing to move us forward as a global workforce. And we're diving into building trust across the generations without sending your team packing, right? So how do we continue to foster this multi-generational space? Because it's not always easy. We're not always speaking the same language, and our communication is suffering in many ways. And there's so much that we need to unpack there to get people, get teams talking, to make teams, to make organizations more profitable, to start saving on your retention efforts, right? It costs up to 200% of a replacement of a position in order to rehire, to onboard, and everything with those positions. So let's start to save organizations to the tune of about $1 trillion in the US on an annual basis. So join me live next week, Wednesday, April 23rd. We're going to be diving in, same time, same place. And this is how you get access to me. All right. Now, that is all for today. Once again, the QR code on the screen will connect you directly to my calendar. But thank you all very much for your attention and for your time today. Once again, I'm Christina Green, your generational translator in the workforce. And it's been my honor. Thank you very much for tuning in today. I will see you next week. Take care.